This is the Innovation Forum.
Welcome to the Innovation Forum. I'm Janine Perrott. Tonight we're exploring the future of getting from A to B. So where exactly are we going? And more importantly, how are we going to get there? The answer will surprise you. Take a look. Does this look familiar? There's no escaping it. Our population is growing, and now the transport solutions we imagined would serve us for centuries are no longer enough to keep us moving. In the modern world, high-speed trains, metros and trams are all helping to break the gridlock. New infrastructure is key. But now the ride-sharing company Uber Technologies has a different way of looking at things as it reimagines the future.
Uber's vision is to get private cars off the road by providing people with alternative, convenient and affordable other modes of transportation. Our vision is that Uber becomes a platform from which you can order your existing Uber car, but also shared rides like Uber Pool products, e-bikes, e-scooters, as well as integrating with public transport through on-demand public transport trials, or even just making sure people can journey plan through one app. We know that if people have a great alternative, then they can leave their car at home, they don't need to worry about parking, and it's better for our cities and for reducing congestion.
Moving forward, Uber has an even more ambitious idea.
Flying cars are real. We have a team in San Francisco with ex-NASA scientists and aerospace experts and people who've worked in this industry for many years. We're working on not only the equipment itself, the aerial takeoff and landing vehicles, we're working with battery engineers to make sure that they are electric and good for the environment, but also trying to work with the local aerospace regulators around how will airspace be regulated. We know that we are going to try testing flights in Dallas and LA next year, including one other international city, of which Australia is still in for the running. So they're real, they're coming, and I'm excited.
Getting flying cars off the ground is not without its share of challenges.
Our approach is to work in partnership with governments and regulators. As new technology comes along, it does change the way that people operate, and governments need to be changing the regulations in order to accommodate new technology. This is the same across telecoms, internet, as well as transportation. I think what we've found, though, in Australia is that the governance and the regulators here are really forward-thinking. They're willing to look at what the future is and be able to make sure that the laws that we have in place here are fit for purpose, and we're really delighted to be able to keep working in partnership with them.
The sky may well be the limit, making it even more important to plan for tomorrow's world today. Yep, it's apparently happening, and we're going to hear from three experts who know about this. Plenty of skin in the game when it comes to innovative transport solutions. Let me introduce the New South Wales Transport Minister, Andrew Constance. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Head of Uber for Business, Georgia Foster. Welcome. And the Managing Director of Consumer Business at carsales.com, AJ Bahati.
Thank you.
Welcome all. First up, Georgia, I have to start with you. Uber Elevate, flying cars. I thought it was a joke. Was it Marty McFly? It's always been a joke. 2015, we were going to have them. That passed. It's 2019. Everyone went, yeah. Really?
It's pretty exciting, isn't it?
But we are serious here. It's not just a marketing exercise. Let's put a few nice videos up, but it'll be...
No, we are serious here. My mantra has always been ask why and do different. And I think I'm in the perfect company because... we've been doing ground transport really well for a long period of time now in the tech years, and certainly now asking the question of why can't we do this in the air?
And why can't we? I mean, how long? How long?
Yeah, well, we have launched in Dallas and in LA, and so we've got the first pilots on the ground next year. We're looking at 2023 for commercial passengers. So there's still some time off and there's still a lot of work to do, and but, you know, we are short.
We heard there, Australia, there's one other international destination,
there is,
Australia. I'll take a stab at it. Is it Melbourne and Sydney that are in the running? Can you give us a hint who's ahead?
Melbourne and Sydney are both shortlisted. We're pretty excited that Australia... No, unfortunately, I don't even know. We will have an answer by the end of the month, which is pretty exciting.
Okay, Andrew Constance.
Well, I'm happy to put a hand up.
Yeah, I hope you have put your hand up.
I reminded you, we were the first to legislate you and make you real in terms of Australia, so we're really keen. But all said and done, there's some challenges. You've got CASA to deal with, you've got...
Well, that's it, you haven't just got road rules, you've got air rules.
And, I think the challenge in all of this is that, like with driverless trains, which we've just moved into Sydney, drones are out delivering pizzas, starting to have a real impact across our community, and to transport people, we're not going to need pilots. It's going to be an incredible change for our community. It's very exciting, and Uber's leading the way.
But I just wonder on that, though, because, to be frank, governments, not necessarily saying yours, but governments have a problem with just conventional old cars on the road. Drones are another added problem. People flying around, does that just fill you with dread?
No. No, absolutely not. You can't think like that. I mean...
No, I know. I'm thinking from a political point of view. Oh, God, there's a nightmare.
There's less dimensions to collide with if you're in the air in a funny way.
Well, not if it takes off.
Well, true. But, I mean, the reality is that transport is a technology business and has been for a long time. And we're really starting to think differently about the way we live, the way we move, and... to be able to utilise drones in this way is phenomenal. So it's very exciting.
I must say that we've had, Australians, the public and the government have been really great to embrace ride-sharing, one of the better countries in the world. And so I think that we are primed for a great opportunity to be really innovative in the air. And so far, from what I've seen, the collaboration with government and CASA have been absolutely quite incredible.
AJ, do people really want this? Because we're not even at where we just we'll get to electric cars and autonomous vehicles next. We thought we'd start with the one, we're going to start there and go backwards. We're hearing that it is a reality, but is there a huge demand, or is it just a novelty thing, do you think?
I think technology has an interesting way of skipping a couple of versions, and sometimes autonomous cars are very, very complicated, and one of the reasons they're complicated is we're in an open environment. We're working with other drivers who drive erratically, and the air is a very interesting environment because it's controlled, unlike land. So I'm a big believer in at some stage we'll have flying autonomous cars. We might have flying autonomous cars before we have open land autonomous cars.
Is that true, that we'll see them in the air before we see them on the ground? Because, I mean, if you go to California, there's autonomous cars working there. Why would we jump it and go to flying first?
It's a possibility, but safety's the #1 priority, whether you're talking about road or air. And I think that there's still some collaboration that needs to occur in order for air to be, safe if we're going to put people into the air. So I certainly think, though, that there's an opportunity for huge advantages by having people in the air instead of on the road.
And are these just drones for ride sharing, or are we talking... Are you going to be able to have individual ones? Where are we going?
I think we're talking about different types of vehicles, actually. So Uber Air utilises eVTOL technology, which is electric vertical takeoff and landing technology.
They're like a helicopter that goes up?
Like a helicopter in a way, but with many differences. So it's actually quieter. It's an opportunity to make it more affordable, and actually it's safer. So
we're not talking Blade Runner here. We've all got our own.
No.
We've got one. Well,
helicopters use, one rotor, so there's actually a single point of failure, whereas eVTOL uses multiple rotors, so it is safer.
Andrew, we're going to talk about the regulatory issues on all of this, electric cars, autonomous vehicles, flying vehicles, obviously. But you're obviously excited. You're with the plan on flying vehicles, but... What I said before about the headaches, do you sort of, seriously, when you're talking about congestion, it solves one problem, but does it create others?
Well, I think I use this phrase that governments can get Ubered, and that is because their regulatory and, in many ways, their licensing systems and the oversight, the compliance, all the red tape, means that our legislation has to be more agile, and we've got to be forward-thinking. And even our Passenger Transport Act, up until many years, didn't even enable ride-sharing, which is just crazy if you think about it today. So for us, it's about staying ahead of the trends, getting out of the way, taking the risks, but doing it in a safe way. And
you can't even get a curfew past 10 o'clock at Sydney Airport. How are you going to manage with this?
Well, don't get me started on that as a country member. But, look, there's no doubt. I mean, autonomous vehicles. I sat in an autonomous vehicle on the streets of San Francisco 18 months ago. The car drove itself on a Saturday morning. bunch of Australian entrepreneurs, actually. Zoox is the company. And they're looking at a very different model in terms of delivery. It's not just one of the car manufacturers here. They're looking at a completely different service model, which is very different to what we're used to. And you're purchasing your mobility as a service. You don't own the vehicle, which is going to be the trend. And what's exciting about all this is our streetscapes, our suburbs, our cities are going to change dramatically. So with Uber Elevate, we've actually even got to think about how we might change the urban interface, where the drones will land, how they will land. Will they land at metro stations into the future? Will they land at Parliament House? You know, all these things, you know, it's going to be very, very different.
I just wonder, just take it that they're similar to a helicopter. I know there's differences, but why don't people just get helicopters everywhere? I mean, that was going to solve the problem. You'd be able to just land, go around, take all these people, and that didn't take off.
Well, the one big difference, well, there's two big differences. The one big difference between helicopters and these drones is they're smart. So helicopters are dumb devices. Helicopters need to be flown by a person. With drones, they're programmable. They're like your smartphone. You download a different software every day and the drone upgrades itself, just like Tesla upgrades itself. So that's a major difference between what you can do with a drone versus what you can do with a helicopter, is you can program it.
So, Georgia, I just want to get through the logistics of this. How high are we looking? Are we talking literally like the movies that we will sit there watching people, you can see them there? Are we talking how high? What is this going to look like? You're talking only a couple of years away. What's the early stage of flying vehicles going to look like?
Yeah, look, I think that comes down to discussions that we have with CASA, and which is a regulatory body around this. You know, there's lots of experts in America working on this that are ex-NASA, and they're probably more well-equipped to talk about the distance and the height that they'll travel at than I will. But take, for example, the idea of being able to take your Uber Air from the top of your office building. You know, it's an 8-kilometre journey to Sydney Airport, for example. It takes you about an hour in peak hours at the moment, and we're talking under 9 minutes to get from that building to the airport.
But that's exactly what they do in Sao Paulo with choppers to avoid it. They just go chopper to the airport.
Choppers are a bit different in the sense that they actually, so the eVTOLs actually go straight up, drive across and go straight down. Don't get me started on how they actually work, but certainly a lot more effective if we're talking about areas, especially in CBDs.
To add to that, Aeromobile, which it's a major company in flying cars, they're developing cars that can both drive on the road as well as fly. So in the first version is certainly a drone that doesn't drive on the road, but the second version that's coming in, they're estimating 5 to 7 years. This is a car that you can drive on the road as well as fly.
We keep talking about drones, but these are obviously drones that can take people. There are a lot of people who are already worried that there's too many drones out there. They became cheap. They're a security threat. These are things that a government has to look at. I mean, it's great you're embracing new technology and excited about it, but surely sometimes you have to err on the side of caution in these days?
Well, I mean, look, I think generations that are forthcoming, they have a very different view of the world that I certainly did, 20 years ago. And it is a very different atmosphere for people today in terms of the way they grow up, their experience, even their attitudes towards privacy. We're seeing that in the online environment. So the way in which technology affects mobility, for many, I don't see that being so much the issue. I think drones, yes, I mean, if used inappropriately, do pose security challenges for governments and the wider community. But generally, I think if this technology is embraced, it's a larger scale of drone compared to what we're seeing in terms of pizza deliveries and those types of things, but it's going to be a very different mode, which will be, I think, embraced.
Yet in the US, there is a push to license, to regulate, to be a bit more careful because it's done. I mean, we're getting the same pressure here. Yeah,
I mean, invariably you will. I mean, but for my view is the government should be there just to provide a regulatory regime which is about community safety. But we don't necessarily need to be involved in, red tape to the point where you can't allow technology to flourish. We've done that before. It hasn't worked. And technology gets ahead of us all anyway. And we end up retrofitting legislation and regulation, and it's just silly. So governments have got to think differently in this space. So that's what I'm wanting to see. We've got a lot of engineers working in transport agencies around the world. We need futurists in many ways.
So I'm just going to clear this up. That's why I asked about, we keep referring to them as drones.
I was about to say.
Yes, they're not drones, are they? So we get a little confused here, but
we're not taking.
we're not talking about drones.
Making-
I'm
helps
talking
the
about flying
community
vehicles.
understand.
So they're drones with people, but they're not really.
No.
Okay.
They're not.
Give us some other logistics. So just the early ones we'll see. So we're not talking pie in the sky, because we've all seen it where companies, no offence, Georgia, talk it up. It looks great. The video's there. Let's get excited. And as poor old Marty McFly saw in Back to the Future in the 80s, 30 years, nothing happened. What will the ones that we're seeing now, what might they see at whichever city's lucky enough to get the pilot? What are they going to look like? How many people will they take? What will we see when we look up?
Yeah, and I think there's still a lot of work being done on that. They are a thing. They do exist.
They're a thing. You've heard it here.
And I think that, you know, we're going to see even over the next year or so until we start actually taking flights in Dallas and LA, and we will see some innovation in the technology as well. So I think that
So how
it's
many
well worth
roughly?
sitting around and waiting for it to
You
actually
can't tell us
happen.
how many they take? We're talking 2, 4? Is it Jetsons? Is it 8? Is it what?
Look, I would be speculating.
Okay. So it's a...
Dubai has trialled
Yes.
flying cars, and those cars only take one person.
Right.
But they have trialled it.
So they're more the Jetsons. More.
Yeah, they're most of the jets.
I think, like, Uber's idea about reducing congestion and helping cities move better is actually to put more people into fewer cars.
Well, we're going to
So
get
the
to that
same-
later, because
the
there's
same-
an argument that Uber has
Yeah.
caused a lot of this congestion.
Sure.
We'll talk about that in the last segment. But as a politician, as a transport minister, that must be just heaven to hear another solution to getting rid of congestion. We don't just have to pay for that Sydney Metro.
I mean, it's technology, you know, in terms of the way, even just the way that the motorways work, you know, into the future, how this works, because it's not just a case of, you know, drones leaving from particular ports necessarily. I mean, people want personalised services, and they want to be able to get across cities without even necessarily having to think. And that's where it's all heading, and that's where the the flying motor vehicles are going to come into this. It will change another dynamic, and certainly in terms of the growth we're seeing in our cities across the world, and the impact of congestion socially and economically, this is definitely the right way to go.
OK, I want to ask, just before we move on to the more conventional, modern, you know, future, Andrew, there's always a fear with these kind of new technologies. It's great that it's ride-sharing. You talked about Dubai and single ones. A lot of money in Dubai. Is there a fear that this will be something that's a rich person's plaything? And Elon Musk, you know, is it the Tesla of the year? I mean, he's doing one, it's mixed with space, you know, of course he'd be in it. But, yeah, is that the fear?
That is certainly the fear. It's the same fear with electric cars at the moment, but it takes time. Elon Musk has now released Tesla 3. Hyundai, I think it's Iconic, or I might get the name wrong. It's a $45,000 electric car. And the same thing will happen with flying cars too.
Because I think at the moment it's $250,000 or something, someone estimated.
Yeah, it's 280,000
Yeah.
for one of the cheapest ones, yeah.
So this Dubai one, have you seen it flying? Have you seen the...
Yeah,
Tell us what you've seen will look like.
What I've seen it looks like is it has 4 propellers. It unfortunately looks like a drone.
There you go.
It's not a drone, but it looks like a drone.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Talk sense.
It looks like a drone. One person can see a bit of a Jetsons thing, yeah.
Yeah. And Georgia, again, this issue, I mean, obviously Uber is about ride-sharing, bringing costs down, but is there the fear until you can get it right where it's shared, it is a novelty thing? It's a bit like going on...
No, making it affordable's part of one of the top 3 objectives. And certainly, as I said before, getting more people into vehicles, whether they are eVTOL or whether they're on the roads, is high priority.
OK, and finally, Andrew Constance, unfortunately, as the Transport Minister, we've seen how long it took to get, and as you said, your government was innovative on innovation, but we saw how long it took, and many places are still arguing over Uber on the ground in a conventional, you know, combustion engine. How on earth do you think you get through the concerns, the NIMBYs, the people? I mean, I don't like drones going over my backyard. I'm not sure I need the bigger one there. You know, there is a lot. You might want innovation, but there's also the downside.
Yeah, I mean, look, as with any technology, there's always going to be those negatives and those positives which have to be ironed out. But if you look at the greater good and the very nature of what we're trying to achieve here in terms of the quality of life and the impact of travel, I mean, the number of hours on... Even with the opening of the new driverless train, the number of compliments we're getting online where people are saying, oh, I'm seeing my sweetheart for an extra, you know, 6, 7 hours a week.
I don't want to be
that.
negative, but the driverless trains had a few glitches at stops between
No,
stations. If a flying car goes, woof.
Well, but again, I think that the key element of this is that, I mean, look at the number of fatalities we're having on our roads. There is going to always be this challenge. I mean, the key interesting point in all of this is the national government, not the states. National governments are going to have to regulate an algorithm here at some point, and that's going to be a very interesting debate in terms of risk. So there you go.
We are getting to the regulatory side later, but now that you mentioned that we're going to talk about the other side of it, the more conventional side, let's try and keep our feet on the ground, shall we? We're talking electric vehicles and autonomous cars after the break, plus the integrated transport solutions, which Andrew Constance has been talking about, of the future. That's all coming up on the Innovation Forum, so don't move.
This program proudly supported by ACS. Think ahead, create the future, change the world.
Welcome back. We're looking at the innovative ways to get around on the Innovation Forum here tonight. And who better to join me on the panel than the New South Wales Transport Minister, Andrew Constance, Head of Uber for Business, Georgia Foster, and the Managing Director of Consumer Business at carsales.com, AJ Bahati. They say electric cars are the future. Are they?
Introducing the Mercedes AA Class, the first fully electric luxury sedan powered entirely by AA batteries. No more plugs, no more charging stations, just 9,648 AA batteries. Zero emissions, lifetime drivetrain warranty, and a top speed of 52 miles per hour. Everything you've come to expect from Mercedes. Onboard satellite navigation, Bose stereo system, and ample trunk space to store extra batteries.
Obviously, that was a bit of fun. It was a joke, sending it up. As we know, we've moved a long way. And yes, that was Julia Louise-Dreyfus, I just want you to know. But yeah, so that's the fun of it. Andrew, let's talk about, because obviously electric cars became a talking point at the beginning of the election. We know that Labor, Bill Shorten, forecast 50% electric vehicles in Australia by 2030. That was his target. New vehicles would be electric. Now, I know this is a hard thing to ask, but let's take the politics out of it.
Yeah.
It was an aspiration, shall we say. Is that unrealistic? And I know the New South Wales government is putting money into charging stations. What is your forecast for the take-up of electric vehicles?
Well, look, first of all, we've got to have the real discussion here. We don't have baseload electricity to even keep the lights on in summer in some states.
Good point.
So, I mean, how the hell are we going to run our electric car fleet without actually looking at our baseload power? I mean, that's the first point. And no one's talking about that. We're not talking about that enough. So we will see the advent of more hybrid vehicles, I think, into Australia with the combination. But the interesting thing, we're running an electric bus trial to the south of Sydney in a regional area. The interesting thing from a business perspective, the operators have told me usually run a diesel bus per kilometre about $1.30. They're now running an electric bus for about 11 cents per kilometre.
Well, how does that work with what you just said, that we have rising electricity prices, a problem with electricity, and yet you can do that cheap?
Well, again, I think business will drive it because it makes economic sense. We don't need to set aspirational targets from government and go out there and play the politics.
So it's not, just to viewers out there, it's not going to send you consumer electricity prices soaring even more because it's all going into the car grid?
There's going to be that constraint. There's going to be the reality is that there's not the base load to meet that target that Shorten was talking about, in my opinion. I think we've got to actually step up to the market and say, right, well, how are we going to power our car fleet and our truck fleet?
So I'll just stress this. So despite the money, you're putting millions into charging stations. That's all very well, but you're going to need the electricity. You're saying you've got to get the source first.
We've only put $5 million into charging stations. And we're putting them into places like commuter hubs and along some of the freeways. But the hard, cold reality, and one of my guys on my staff said earlier, we actually probably won't need charging stations into the future because of the very nature of the technology which will self-propel the vehicles. And then, of course, in your home environment, you can charge up your vehicle and away you go. But my sense out of it is the manufacturers will be looking at Australia saying, right, yeah, more hybrid vehicles in the short term because we just simply don't have that capacity in terms of it.
AJ, you agree with that?
I agree with one point, but I disagree with one. So the one that I disagree with is with the base load electricity, the technology is advancing really, really fast. And cars, the most expensive part of an electric car is the battery. The cheapest will be 40% of the car cost of an electric car is the battery. In some cases, 100% of the cost of the car is the battery, and they subsidise the rest because they want to get the electric cars out. These batteries, in the case of Nissan Leaf, they're capable of storing electricity and putting electricity back onto the grid. So that argument around baseload electricity can be thought about differently as the electric cars continue to develop and the battery technology continues to develop. So you're effectively charging the car overnight when it's not peak, and then you're putting the electricity back onto the grid around peak time. So, and around the other argument that you had around charging stations, I do tend to agree. Australia has the largest proportion of garages in the world, one of the largest portion. And therefore, charging at home is very, very convenient here in Australia. What we do need to think about is, I don't think we need to spend $1 billion or even $100 million from the government. It's a waste of taxpayers' money building charging stations.
They've only spent $5 million,
I think that's about right. We need to be responsible with taxpayers' money. There's companies like ChargeFox who are doing this, and private enterprise will come up with a business model to do this. And all government needs to do is recognise the innovative players, point them in the right direction with the right policy, remove the obstacles, and the business will do this.
Uber is the disruptor, Georgia. Where do you see electric vehicles, Australia in the electric vehicle world? The estimates say, looking at that Labor policy of 50% of new vehicles by 2030. Is it realistic?
Yeah, I think that every autonomous vehicle that we're designing and building is an electric vehicle. The eVTOL vehicle,
which is the drone with people,
are electric. And the notion is that they can leave, take you to the Sydney airport, drop you down, they charge and they go back again.
So you're going to need charging stations for what we just talked about before.
Yeah, I think ultimately, in the end, we have the same goal as everybody else, is to move to that area.
Let's look at the issues that came up in the election, and there was a lot of fear about it. Will my diesel and my petrol car disappear if you're pushing us into electric cars? We won't even go into the ute. What will it do to the value of our cars? I mean, a car is the second biggest item you purchased after a house. Does that mean your car's going to depreciate in value? I mean, people do worry about these. I mean, I know they say electric vehicles are coming down in price, but as we saw in the election campaign, they're still, even though Bill Shorten couldn't remember the price, they are still quite expensive. Tell us about, from just the personal consumer, the person out there who's worried about what this means for what they've got now.
Look, I think with the advent of semi-autonomous and autonomous vehicles, I mean, car ownership's going to change too. You won't own your car.
Yeah, I keep hearing this. I go to Silicon Valley, but it's a way off.
Oh, I'm not so sure. We're seeing car ownership drop in inner cities around the world now. I think the element out of it is that we will see the very nature of car ownership change. I mean, Australians, yes, have grown up and everyone has two cars and
You're not going to take their ute away, are you, Andrew?
Well, not in the country, we probably won't, but certainly in terms of the city. I mean, there isn't that requirement to really own a car. So you'll purchase your mobility as a service. And in that way, I think the car ownership concept will move to how business runs fleets of vehicles. And therefore, you know, your commuter car parks, how they become service centres overnight to repair, maintain these vehicles. It's going to be a real different change.
And when I go to Silicon Valley, this is the argument they're making. It was interesting you said about garages. They're talking about how this will change urban planning because you won't need garages. Everything will be having a charging station, having a ride-sharing spot out the front. It's such a change for Australians who love their garage.
It's a massive change. It's not only a change for our lifestyles and for our lifestyle choices, but it's change for our business models. We have a number of car dealers across the country, and their business models will change. And we're in the car business too, and we tend to think about car as a service. is a good part of the future. And as a major industry player, we tend to think we're here to innovate in the industry and take our dealers through the process of how do you navigate this new economy.
Well, my question to Andrew about people worrying about their second biggest item, carsales.com, would that be a worry?
Well, for like any business that doesn't innovate goes out of business. And for us, we're constantly thinking. We do think a lot of this is a while away, and this is not happening tomorrow. But at the same time, we are planning in our business, and we're thinking about our industry as well as our business and what the future looks like.
Okay. Well, sorry.
I was just going to say, Janine, I mean, we're about, in New South Wales, we're sort of leading the world in the on-demand space. So we're trying to, with the advent of ride-sharing through the Ubers of this world, we're now getting people thinking differently about how they do purchase their mobility. We're starting to run trials around this state where instead of running 65-seater buses, you run smaller buses around communities, but at the same time, people are actually able to purchase the service. It's more door-to-door in its feel, but On-Demand's now carried 400,000 people around Sydney as part of the trial, and it's getting people to think differently about how you might manage your transport. And the car ownership question then does very much start to come.
I want to take it a little bit further. We're talking about electric cars, but of course the next stage of that's autonomous vehicles. And there is an argument that says, we've been hearing about this, and that is still a way off. The technology's not, but the big take-up. Take Uber, for example. All those Uber drivers would be out of work if autonomous vehicles go.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's entirely correct.
Well, hold on. An autonomous vehicle doesn't need a driver, does it?
Yeah, but what will happen with autonomous is actually opens up new jobs. And so you think about, you're going to need people to maintain the vehicles. You're going to need people to monitor the behaviour of the vehicles and continuously enhance the reporting there. So, you know, these are roles that don't exist today that'll be opened up through.
How far off from an Uber point of view are we from having an autonomous fleet?
Look, we are still some way off. To put it into perspective,
okay.
1%...
Before a flying vehicle or after?
Who knows? But 1%...
That's the great race. That's the great
1% of all all miles taken across the globe are through rideshare. So in order for us to move to autonomous, we'd really need to be at 25%, I think.
OK, from the regulatory point of view, again, this is the big issue when you go to the states. It's certainly because, say, California's way ahead. There's other states. Autonomous vehicles don't just need regulation. They need a lot of technology along the roads because that's how it works. How far advanced are we on that? And what's the use of it if New South Wales is ahead, if you go over the border and suddenly your autonomous vehicle doesn't know what's happening?
Again, this is where the challenge in Australia is because we, you know, obviously with the various approaches across different states. I mean, we are running trials in New South Wales. We've run a trial at Sydney Olympic Park, and we now have an autonomous vehicle actually moving around Sydney Olympic Park by itself, carrying passengers. That's happening. So for us, I think it'll be very much a case of moving with, and in many ways it's organic. You know, we will see the manufacturers move into this space, and we've just got to adapt in our thinking.
How far off? Before a flying car or not? That's
well,
what
the
we've got to
venture
get to.
capital is scaling up businesses in San Fran now, and we will start to see service models, I believe, in the next couple of years. I mean, 2 to 3 years. Where I think the challenge lies in places such as Sydney and Australia, and is the data to capture how the vehicles can interface with a city, and that's where we're behind. And that's where the challenge lies in terms of how we can capture the data so the vehicles do know how to perform and behave in all scenarios, and that's where the algorithm comes into it. They're the challenges for Australia, and I think our worry is we don't want to be left behind.
And this is a highly competitive space, right? There's no secret that there are many companies out there that are trying to vie to be the autonomous leader. But I think, you know, we, for example, have had over 1,000 people working on this for quite some time. I think there's 3 million miles that have been clocked, and we're still not able to say that tomorrow morning you'll wake up with an autonomous.
And AJ, I'd like yours. Yeah, Tesla's there. I've been going to Silicon Valley. I was at Stanford. They were talking about it 10 years ago. Every time I go, somebody is driven to the conference in an autonomous vehicle with their hands off. I got on my Mini the other day, I want you to know. I do the automatic parking. It was fabulous. But it was getting faster and faster, and it mounted the curb the other day, and I said, I'm sorry, I really... Yeah. You have to be really careful on these things. How long till you think it's not the novelty? Okay. Or do you think flying cars are going to overtake?
The first thing is there are 3 levels, well, there are 5 levels of autonomy, and most of the cars on the road today
have some form of it.
Some form of autonomy. We call it level 3. Level 3 is sort of, you know, you can take your hands off the steering wheel and it can drive on the motorway, and that's level 3.
But you can't do that because it's illegal.
Yeah,
so I
sure.
wanted to point that out.
Sure, sure. The technology is there to do that.
But don't do this at home.
Please don't do that. And level 4 is eyes off. You know, you can sort of, you know, eat your food.
Don't do that either.
Yeah, don't do that. But those cars are not on the road anyway. And then level 5 is when you have the confidence and the driver isn't there anymore. But the difference between 99% and 100% is what takes a very, very long time. So there is a difference between a closed environment autonomous car and an open environment autonomous car. The Minister just mentioned in Sydney Olympic Park we have a closed environment, we have an autonomous car. I think it will be less than 5 years. You know, you might say, Sydney, you can't enter Sydney without an autonomous car. And you could do that technically in 5 years' time, install some infrastructure and so on. In an open environment, I think it's a couple of decades away.
There you go. Well, there are so many more challenges to get to where we're going. We're going to look at how to integrate these transport solutions and ask whether we're getting it right. That's going to be an interesting one. That's to come on the Innovation Forum. Stay tuned.
This program proudly supported by ACS. Think ahead. Create the future. Change the world.
Welcome back to the Innovation Forum, where we're looking at transport, the future of transport today. And no, it's not just trains. We've done everything from flying vehicles to electric cars to autonomous vehicles. So it's not pie in the sky, it's very real. But we've also been looking at what the challenges are, and usually, of course, they start with government. Andrew Constance, New South Wales's government. What do you think in all these transport solutions we're looking about? You talk about innovation, you talk about New South Wales working ahead. Is it government, or is it the consumer of fear of technology?
Look, I think governments have a leadership responsibility. They certainly have the need to be able to better partner with the private sector to deliver. But first and foremost, it's all about community safety. And that's where ultimately we have to push ourselves, and there's no doubt about that, and we should be up for that task.
So you think it can be done? You worry about safety? Because traditionally, innovation, private companies, the Ubers have worked so far ahead, you're catching up.
Absolutely, and that's always been the traditional way with government. Nothing new there. But I am trying to push the boundary with the Transport Agency in this state to think differently, because it's not just a case about building the big mega projects and the infrastructure, it's how you use them, coupled with the incredible innovation out there.
Georgia, looking at Uber's point of view, where do you go? We've talked about your plans on Uber Elevate and whatever, but what is the simpler disruption or way you're going? I mean, I gather it's things like you want people to become one-car families. Well, that's a lovely idea. It would help Andrew Constance on congestion, but how do you get there?
Yeah, I think that Uber Air is just one additional mode of transport.
But you're basically about ride sharing in a way, so that helps.
Yeah, we're looking to, integrate all modes of transport. So I think if we think about private car ownership and how we might be able to help alleviate congestion, and maybe that is removing it from 2-car families down to 1, then we really need to make sure that all modes of transport are seamlessly working together so that we can, equal the true value of that one car. And so Uber Air is one of them, but, Jump bikes that launched in San Francisco and launching next month in Hamilton, New Zealand.
What's a jump bike?
It's an electronic bike.
Oh, I've seen them. Okay,
yes.
I didn't know them.
And scooters and Uber Pool and a number of other modes.
I've seen Paul Money on an electric scooter at the Adelaide Grand Prix. It was a sight to behold.
Can I just underscore, everything talking to everything, we need one network operating system, and we don't have that. That's the big challenge, how we get everything talking to everything.
Well, to be fair, governments can't do that on anything else. Why do you think they'll do it on this?
That we shouldn't. But our challenge is to the Ubers of this world to actually develop that operating system so that everything does talk to
Yeah, and we are moving towards that one platform. We've already got some projects in place with New South Wales government, with ACT government, to integrate the Manly Ferry, for example, into the Uber platform so we can reduce congestion.
Like how? Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so being able to look at first and last mile of a journey. So, for example, utilising the Manly Ferry and then putting people into Uber Pool technology.
So they can connect with it.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. AJ, now, we've been hearing about how George is obviously talking how Uber's good for helping traffic congestion. Not everyone believes that Uber has helped it. I know in New York, the traffic congestion has got considerably worse, and one of the key elements is the fact that there are so many more Uber cars on the road in a small area. Now, part of Uber's selling point is we'll be there in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, which means these cars have to circle, park, have to be waiting so they can be there within a few minutes. That's a problem, isn't it?
It's a huge problem, and it will be a problem even when we get to autonomous cars. And I don't think that's necessarily for us to blame Uber about this. Uber's done a great job in making consumer experience much better. I hardly order taxis, much more convenient to order Uber. I know exactly where the driver is, but the issue is we need to work with, Uber needs to work with government, ride-sharing needs to work with government to understand where those parking spots are, where can these cars stop rather than circle around the city. So I think it's a road planning issue more than it is an Uber issue. But there are really interesting technology out there that can help government do better planning around understanding traffic flows and understanding what sorts of cars are on the road at a particular time. Carsales has developed one technology that can actually help with that sort of planning, and that can offload a lot of those issues that Uber potentially creates.
Andrew, this issue of everybody can now be a cab driver, shove an Uber sign in the back. I know it's not that easy, but there's more cars going to the congested areas. How do you offset the downside of ride sharing?
Well, I think the aim is to get more people carpooling as part of the model. I mean, cars are an inefficient form of transport. I mean, everybody driving around Sydney at the moment is typically one.
Yeah, but Australians are very attached to them, and in fact, the Libs did push it very hard in the election. You want your car.
Complain hard about congestion too at the same time, and so I think if we have better mass transit systems, and then
so public transport's still the answer.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some incredible shifts onto public transport in the last couple of years in Sydney. I mean, the trains have gone up by 120 million passenger trips in the space of 5 years, from 300 million to 420 million passenger trips per year. People are getting out of their cars. They're costly. They're inefficient. And it is.
I thought car sales were jumping since the election.
Well, so's the population. Yeah. Well, anyway, but we won't go into that. But the point out of it is that people are looking at a more affordable and sensible way to live, and ultimately, I think with the advent of ride sharing, I'm also hoping that the taxi industry starts to see a lot more innovation as well in terms of.
Oh, don't tell me the old cabs have been slow to innovate.
No. Some of them are actually starting to do some really smart stuff. It's really quite telling, but it's flowing through to a really archaic system where they were in essence completely beholden to red tape and government, and that's how they had to operate. They weren't able to be innovative because they were tied up in red tape. We're trying to loosen that.
In 30 years, we're going to have the same population problems that we're trying to manage as New York and London. And so if we don't get smart about thinking about cities and we work, private enterprise, public enterprise with government to make sure that we're thinking in advance, I think we could run into a lot of...
London came up with the congestion tax or raise more money, so of course the argument is, I think, AJ, that if we go to autonomous vehicles, electric cars, the governments like Andrew's are going to lose a lot of tax, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think...
we'll find another way.
Oh,
I'm sure they'll find another way.
Spoken like a true Poland. You'll be innovative.
Well, it's just like, everyone's business model is impacted, whether it's car dealers, whether it's carsales.com, whether it's government, and we all have to innovate our business models. And opportunity is greater for all of us. And that's the key.
But I think what we're seeing, Sydney is now getting a new metro train network. Now, people are loving it, and we're going to build it through the city. We'll build it out to the west, build it around the Western Sydney airport. Increasingly, governments will build those mass transit.
They come from taxes, and a lot of those taxes come from not electric cars.
Yeah, well, asset recycling, being smarter about how you do it, that's what we did. We leased up poles and wires to pay for the new metro train under the harbour. that's what we're doing. So you don't necessarily need to hurt the household bills in that way. And that's where the challenge lies, and that's where it's about being smart. And I think we are going to increasingly see people opt for public transport. If we can get the best modes and then get people feeding in, and I think Uber probably experienced getting people to metro stations with the new train. It's there. People are opting for that.
Lightning round. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask you each, what do you think is going to be the biggest change in transport for people in 10 years? Sitting here, what's your prediction? What's it going to be? Will it be flying cars? Will it be autonomous? What do you think in 10 years from now?
I think in 10 years' time, we will have a lot more car as a service. Rather than people necessarily buying cars, people will, so to say, rent cars on short-term basis, and if they like the car...
But traditional cars on the ground?
It's electric cars on the ground with autonomous features, but not fully autonomous.
Georgia, what does Uber see as the way we'll be transported in 10 years?
Yeah, look, I think that, I hope that it's an Australian city that's shortlisted so that we're well advanced in terms of flying cars, but I think that one of the areas is just a completely integrated app that enables you to choose the best mode of transport for you to travel around, whether that's bike, whether that's a ferry, etc.
Andrew, give us the 10-year plan for a government. There you go. Just quickly, what do you think is the most important change those viewers will see in 10 years in transport?
I think less car ownership, more public transport usage with the apps. That's it. And we've started to see that in the last 5 years. It'll go off the charts, and then people won't be thinking about it. They'll be getting around the challenges that might exist in terms of population moving across the city.
Except in the country where they'll still have the utes.
Yeah, well, coming from Bega, we'll still have our utes.
That's all we wanted to hear. We're going to leave it there. We could talk all night on transport and the future. But that's it for the Innovation Forum this week. I want to thank our panel, Andrew Constance, New South Wales Transport Minister, AJ Bahati, carsales.com.au, and Georgia Foster, Head of Uber for Business. Thank you all very much. That's it for now. Coming up next, Paul Murray Live with Rowan Dean tonight. We'll see you soon.